You're listening to an Airwave Media Podcast.
The family that vacations together stays together. At least, that was the plan. Except now, the dastardly desk clerk is saying he can't confirm your connecting rooms.
Wait, what?
That's right, ma'am. You have rooms 201 and 709.
No, we cannot be 5 floors away from our kids.
The doors have double locks. They'll be fine.
When you want connecting rooms confirmed before you arrive, it matters where you stay.
Welcome to Hilton. I see your connecting rooms are already confirmed.
Hilton, for the stay.
Wish you could become a morning person? You know the type, up before the sun, early morning runs, first one to the office with donuts and a smile. How do they do it? Easy. With a new Galaxy Watch 8, sleep tracking and personalized insights from Samsung Health help you improve so you can wake up to a whole new you. One who, dare I say it, skips the snooze? It's possible. Train your sleep with Galaxy Watch 8. Learn more at Samsung.com. Requires compatible Samsung Galaxy phone, Samsung Health app, and Samsung account.
It was just after 9:30 p.m. when the streetwalkers in Times Square were suddenly doused in darkness.
The night was July 13th, 1977. Sweltering summer heat wave in New York City. And suddenly, city goes dark. Streetlights flickered off. Subways stop in the tunnels.
When thousands of passengers on graffiti-scarred trains became stuck, often in tunnels.
Traffic signals fail. Intersections are in chaos. Cars don't know when to go or when to stop. There's crime. Looting, arson, robberies, violence across neighborhoods. Cars pulling down steel grates.
All the services had deteriorated. The subways were filled with graffiti, crime, police, fire, sanitation, education, social services had all been decimated.
Stolen truck is used, chained to metal doors in order to bust open some of the stores that had the best furniture or other goods. Whole blocks of Broadway in Brooklyn were left in flames by the morning.
Civilians directing traffic. Surgery moved outside at Brooklyn Jewish Hospital to utilize car batteries as backup power.
More than 1,600 businesses are damaged. The collapse itself begins with a bolt of lightning at 8:34. It trips the circuit breakers at a substation on the Hudson, and it cut off key power from the Indian Point plant. Normally, the breakers would reclose, but a loose locking nut and a slow upgrade cycle prevents this from happening. There's more lightning, it knocks out critical transmission lines, and Con Edison's operators in Manhattan are left staring at control room displays that didn't clearly show what circuits were still open. They call the state power pool. Efforts to back up turbines in Astoria fail when the units couldn't synchronize with the unstable system. And an East River generator had to be cut back, and several others already offline for maintenance. Con Edison tries to shed the load by lowering voltage across the city. But the buried transmission cables that carry so much of New York's power made the protection systems react unpredictably. And at 9:29 p.m., the largest generator in the city, that's Ravenswood Unit Number 3, interpreted erratic conditions as a short circuit. And it shuts itself off. It's 1977, folks. Not quite artificial intelligence, but it's something close. They had set up automatic systems. And the city's now cut off from New Jersey, Long Island, and upstate, and its remaining plants in the city cannot fill that gap. By 9:37, just after an hour after the first lightning strike, New York City's in total blackout. This would be a big year, and not necessarily a good year, for the city of New York, 1977. Rupert Murdoch was as in-your-face as the red stripe he added to the New York Post headline. Everybody who worked there knew that Murdoch was everywhere. If you were typing, you can be sure he'd be over your shoulder. He might rewrite the story before it became vital, or he'd just add a snazzy headline. Murdoch bought the New York Post in 1976, just the year before. It was not his first U.S. paper. That was the San Antonio News. There, He made his paper circulation boost by thrilling headlines, such as the wave of killer bees coming to the United States. He also added a gossip column, page 6, which was obsessed with who was with who at various restaurants. When the city's lights went out in the middle of the summer heat, the police are ill-prepared. They don't know what to do. They had just been layoffs. 5,000 cops in a recent wave had been laid off. Stations had just experienced reading off, we didn't have the fax machine quite then, but like a teletype type machine, reading off names of cops that would be laid off. Foolishly, they tell police, don't bother finding your precinct, go to your nearest precinct. Well, years ago, the city had, in collective bargaining, allowed the cops to not live in the city. So for a lot of people, the closest district was a district that was going to be fairly safe from the looting, leaving a lot of cops in Staten Island and places where the looting wasn't so bad. Some cops just didn't show up. The headlines in the Post made everything more dramatic. 24 hours of terror, one reads. A city ravaged. Murdoch wasn't totally wrong. The blackout was bad.
Beam is New York City's 104th mayor, its first Jewish mayor, and the oldest man ever elected to lead the nation's largest city. He's 68. The Lindsay administration was innovative, brash, experimental. Beam, the controller, become mayor, is conservative, careful, thrifty.
It is a time when the people's trust in the integrity of their leaders has been greatly shaken.
Mayor Beam didn't like these headlines that Rupert Murdoch was putting out. He called him an Australian carpetbagger. Beam says he's making Hustler look like Harvard Yard. Murdoch wasn't listening anyway. When he took over the New York Post from Dorothy Schiff in late 1976, he didn't wait long to make it his own. Murdoch injected tabloid adrenaline. He brings in Steve Dunleavy from Murdoch's Daily Mirror in Sydney and The Sun in London, papers that he owned. He was a brash Murdoch tabloid man, gritty, colorful, unafraid to be sensational. It was a gift, this blackout, to the New York Post. Graphic depictions of looting, burning neighborhoods, lurid details that seemed written for maximum shock value. Dunleavy gave people writing that was like a pulp novel more than journalism. Deputy Mayor Osborne Elliott accused Murdoch of deliberately fanning panic. Restoration begins the next morning. It drags through the following day. Some neighborhoods wait till late evening in July 14th for their power to return. President Carter in Washington is monitoring events. He knows he won the election last year. One of the reasons he wins the state of New York is the city of New York, and the fact that the previous president, Gerald Ford, had told the city no to any federal money during its crisis. Carter approves $11 million in emergency aid. Mayor Beam lashes out at Con Edison for gross negligence. An relatively unknown candidate, Ed Koch, former congressman, was thinking about running in 73 and didn't.
We pay the average police officer $30,000 a year in salary and benefits to protect us. But of 25,000 police in this city, only 1,500 patrol the streets on an average shift. More cops than that call in sick every day.
Very low in the polls, he gets up and says what others can't say. The police commissioner should be fired. I want his head.
Obviously, we need more police on the streets, and we can do it without spending more money, by better use of the police force we already have. That may mean taking on the police bureaucracy and the PBA, but that's what a mayor has to do.
Raise your hand, he said to a crowd, if you think we should get rid of the police commissioner. And of course, it was his rally. The hands went up. This was a very frequent Ed Koch tactic. Like, he'd get, if you were in an Ed Koch rally and he's in front of you, expect things to be interactive. Like, he would make you raise your hand and say you're going to go out and get 10 voters. Yeah, it's a pretty effective tactic, but that's the way Ed Koch was. Mario Cuomo, then New York City's Secretary of State, was the man that Governor Hugh Carey wanted to block Mayor Abe Beam from becoming mayor. He had to bail out the city, and he wasn't happy with Beam's performance.
Obviously, we need more police on the streets, and we can do it without spending more money, by better use of the police force we already have. That may mean taking on the police bureaucracy and the PBA, but that's what a mayor has to do.
He also didn't like Bella Abzug, a feminist who was also running in the 77 race. Kerry wants Mario Cuomo, said one Republican leader, and Kerry had even pushed the primary forward in hopes that Cuomo would step in. But already in 77, this reputation that Mario Cuomo was going to build through the years is starting to be evident. This idea of him as like the Hamlet, the reluctant guy. Even with the governor of the state backing him, he stalls. I told him I couldn't make up my mind, Cuomo admitted. He'd done it before. In 1969, then Congressman Hugh Carey briefly runs for mayor. He asks Cuomo to run with him. Cuomo declines. He later told friends, I regret that. I should have done it. And since he had become a figure in city politics when in 1972 tenants and homeowners in Queens threatened each other over a housing plan. Yeah, this is to bring low-income housing into a more Tony neighborhood in Queens. And Cuomo, out of that crisis, he emerged as what some call a political folk hero. Jimmy Breslin, a reporter who lived nearby, thought Cuomo's caution made him attractive to some of the town's literary heavies. Jack Newfield, another reporter, called him a thinker who could be a little like Hamlet. It's 77, he's already getting that Hamlet comparison that he'd get up until the 1990s when people thought he was going to run for president. Some reporters asked me if I thought I was a fair description of Hamlet, Cuomo recalled, and I said yes. Born the son of a grocer in Queens, he worked his way through truck driving, baseball, law school, academia. I used to get on the subway, New York, Connecticut, upstate, and play for a few bucks under the name Bob. I had some great managers, he remembered, of his ball-playing days. By 1977, he was a father of 5. One of those would be Andrew, who would become governor of New York, and recently a candidate for mayor of New York as well. Admirers saw a man who always would carry a book with him, smart guy who could also be mayor. Detractors saw him as a man who was considering things so much he would never decide. In the spring of 1977, Broadway audiences were introduced to a little red-haired orphan who would quickly become a cultural icon. Annie opens at the Alvin Theater at April 21. Andrea McArdle's in the title role. Now later, this is going to be the same run that later you're going to see Sarah Jessica Parker play Annie in that long run of the show. But first, it's Andrea McArdle who first captures the city's heart, turning a Depression-era comic strip into one of Broadway's biggest hits. As a city struggling with blackouts, deficits, violence, a serial killer, Son of Sam, will also ravage the city in this year. The musical's promise that the sun will come out tomorrow seemed just right. And this whole mayoral election is about this, like bad management versus the sun will come out. A few blocks uptown, another kind of performance was taking shape. Studio 54 opens its doors in a converted theater on West 54th Street, hence the name. From the outside, it's another drab Midtown building. But inside, everything happens. An electric playground throbbing with disco beat, strobe lights, mirrored walls. The crowd is as much a show as the performers. Music of another kind roared into Madison Square Garden. The summer of 77. Fleetwood Mac brought their Rumors tour to the city. The album already became a phenomenon, a rawness, the studio polish, Lindsey Buckingham's guitar work, crisp precision, jagged edge. Stevie Nicks, draped in shawls, sang in her haunting, throaty voice that seemed to float over the crowd. Dreams, Go Your Own Way, anthems, legendary songs, music that people still live by, an album that people still love, was introduced live in the Garden. There's tragedy in the city in 77. We referred to the Son of Sam serial killer. He was caught, but not after many a victim, and scaring the city. In May, a New York Airways helicopter, the Pan Am building, broke apart. Its rotor blade slices into people. A woman on the street is killed, 4 on the roof. There are no more rooftop heliports in Midtown after this. Days later, fire tours through the Everard Baths on 28th Street. 9 people are killed. In this time when it almost seemed like maybe New York City just isn't working. I know, don't tell that to the real New Yorkers, I know. There's a mayoral election. And of all the people that could win it, very few people are thinking about Edward Koch. In fact, they're not thinking about Cuomo too much. A New York Times survey at one point wrote, only Abe Beame and Bella could be considered in the Democratic race. Koch knew it. He told reporters later that when he entered it, nobody gave me a chance.
My record in Congress is strongly pro-labor, but our municipal unions consider me anti-union. They don't like the fact that I want city employees to live in the city, that I want educators to account to the mayor for schools that don't teach, and that I don't want patrolmen to get 2 days off with pay for donating a pint of blood. There's no point in getting angry at Al Shanker or Vic Gottbaum. They're doing the jobs they were elected to do. It's time we had a tough bargainer on our side of the table.
Cuomo and Koch were also mentioned in the same breath as people who didn't matter. There's also Percy Sutton, the African-American candidate in the race, running to be the city's first black mayor. He had been asked to be someone's, usually you run along with someone else as a candidate for deputy mayor, and he insisted on running himself. So it's a pretty large field. But Koch was funny, and he combines with David Garth, a media consultant, and he had good instincts. He had a great commercial that said, why don't you try competence? You've tried charisma, referring to Lindsay. You've tried the clubhouse, referring to Beame, because Beame was seen as the Democrat from the Democratic clubs. Now try competence. And Cuomo was using TV commercials too, TV commercials invoking the Statue of Liberty and his quote that said, if New Yorkers are angry, we should use that anger to make the city better. Cuomo hated his own TV commercials. He hated a lot of politics, really. His aide, Cuomo had David Garth. He had Gerald Rafshoon, who had just managed Carter's campaign and similarly tried to package Cuomo's image, but Cuomo didn't like being packaged too much. Now, one day, candidate Koch answers his phone and hears, "Hi, it's Rupert." Koch was at about 14% of the polls. He did have some old-timers who knew him as the independent ward leader, who threw out Carmen DeSapio, New York's boss, and the vestige of the Tammany Hall Old Club. And he had been endorsed at that time by Eleanor Roosevelt. But that just made him seem old, a has-been in 1977. Running was that well-known feminist Bella Abzug, the incumbent Mayor Beame, who people didn't like very much, and Mario Cuomo, backed by the governor. Backed so much that people called him the marionette. And it made Cuomo a little resistant from seeking his direct help. For Mayor Abe Beame, his campaign to run for re-election was over after the blackout. And looters are sweeping through Bushwick, Brooklyn, Crown Heights neighborhood of Brooklyn, other neighborhoods, smashing storefronts and all. And I want to say something. A lot of times that term looting is used when the incidents are minor. You have, for example, the example of Katrina, where it was overused, certainly, especially as we're coming on the 20th anniversary, you're going to see that. That's not true of 1977. In certain neighborhoods, it was very true, very real. We have eyewitnesses, we have furniture store owners, a son of a furniture store owner who was 17 at the time talks about how the people coming to, quote, loot, he had some sympathy for them because they were actually people who had been customers and had perused the store in the past, but they were just so desperate. 77's not the greatest economy in the world. In any case, there's a lot of anger against Beame for all of this. And he declares at a ceremony in Brooklyn, there's shouting at him, and he says, violence was a temporary breakdown. We're okay now. But the crowd starts shouting, do your job, do your job. Where were the cops? Where were the cops? And Beame, and I don't like to, he was described often in press accounts of his height. He was 5'2". He had just succeeded John Lindsay, who was a very tall man. And in this, wasn't great for the photo op and for the video because he's kind of shrinking under the crowd. The Daily News headline reads, Beame booed. Bella Abzug's campaign was big, and she's a former congressman. It's alleged, I pointed out in this podcast before, that she said F you to Nixon's face. Very flamboyant hats. On a rally on the Lower East Side, she whipped off her hat and waved it above her head, shouting, "This city needs a woman's common sense and a woman's toughness." And the crowd cheers. Abzug basks in the attention. But press accounts are harsh. They call her brash. Would they have said it about a man waving his hat or waving like that? No, probably not. And so she certainly didn't get a fair treatment, but you're seeing in the 70s a time when in politics women are having more of a role. There will be a city council president elected in New York City at this time. One reporter remarked, Abzug can fill a hall, but can she fill a city with confidence? Mario Cuomo is fending something off. He had made his reputation mediating that housing dispute in Forest Hill, Queens, and where middle-class homeowners fought plans for public housing. He tried to broker peace. That doesn't mean everyone was happy with the solution. And when he goes there thinking it's going to be his home crowd, a woman shouts at him, "You are not welcome here, Cuomo." Cuomo raises his voice above the jeers and says, "All I've ever done is try to bring fairness to this city." Today's show is brought to you by Vanguard. To all of the financial advisors listening, let's talk bonds for a minute. Capturing value in fixed income is not easy. Bond markets are massive, murky, and let's be real, lots of firms throw a couple of flashy funds your way and call it a day. But not Vanguard. Vanguard bonds are institutional quality. Institutional quality isn't a tagline. It's a commitment to your clients. It means top-grade products across the board. The lineup includes over 80 bond funds, actively managed by a 200-person global squad of sector specialists, analysts, and traders. So if you're looking to give your clients consistent results year in and year out, go see the record for yourself at Vanguard.com/audio. That's Vanguard.com/AUDIO. All investing is subject to risk. Vanguard Marketing Corporation, distributor. If it was the Post reporting, they'd say how bad it was because they were kind of backing Koch, and the other papers really did like Cuomo. He was getting some real favorable press. Ed Koch crafts the image of the everyman. Koch realized that nothing symbolizes New York City right now in 1977 more than the subways underneath it. They're filled with graffiti. They're late all the time. They can be dangerous. So he began staging subway rides for the cameras. One July morning, with reporters trailing him, Koch boards the subway, and as it rattles along, a man says, "Hey, Koch, make the trains run on time." And without missing a beat, Koch grins and yells back, "First, I got to make sure they're safe." He is a campaign manager's dream on message. His message is about crime, not about necessarily running trains on time, and so it works. All the candidates are up for a debate, and somebody throws a pie at Mayor Abe Beame. Bella Abzug's like trying to eat a piece of, she's sort of making fun of the event. Beame is loaded with pie in his face here, and Cuomo, without missing a beat, and a witness says that it's almost at the same time the pie is thrown that Cuomo dives at the guy and tackles him before security can come. And it's just one of those Mario Cuomo stories. Here's from Jonathan Mailer's The Bronx is Burning, one of my favorite books, where he mixes baseball, politics, and the battle for soul of the city. I've used this as a guide, and only now here am I actually quoting from his book. I also use newspapers and other things about 1977. The rest of the country was hardly sympathetic. In the late 60s, rioting and Detroit and Newark served to draw attention to the plight of America's cities called ghettos. I don't like that term, but that's what's in this book. The 1977 blackout looting in New York only seemed to confirm everyone's worst suspicions about the metropolis. To go with the fictional portrayals of the dangerous, dystopic city in recent movies, such as Taxi Driver, there was now documentary footage. The Washington Post set the tone, calling the looting an indictment of the state of the city, its government, and its people. A spokesperson for Miami's Chamber of Commerce pointed out that America had expected the worst, and New York had not let it down. Even Christianity Today weighed in, suggesting that God had sent his judgment on a city that had turned away from him. The lack of electricity lit up the realities of people's minds and hearts, this Christian magazine wrote. That's what people are like when separated from the light and the light. Back home, writing in the New Yorker, Andy Logan summed up the popular sentiment thus: instead of comfort, what New York received in the first days after the disaster was the punitive judgment that it got what it's deserved, considering the kind of place it was.
Unemployment compensation payments increased 700%.
Now, President Carter does provide some amount of money, but he doesn't give the city what it wants, which is to be declared a major disaster area.
And we've had welfare payments more than double. And also the great cost of fallen on the homeowners as well. So the property taxes have skyrocketed.
One that would give it badly needed funds for rebuilding.
Primarily because the economy hasn't been managed well.
It got a lot of press that Carter had come to the aid of other regions, including shrimping towns off the coast of Georgia that had endured a cold winter.
I've won some battles and lost some, but I've won some primary campaigns and lost some.
But the blackout was not a natural disaster, he said, and thus it didn't qualify for federal disaster relief. Ed Koch gets this call. It's Rupert. Ed Koch had been campaigning for a long time, probably knew a lot of people, but just one Rupert. Rupert! Ed, we are endorsing you. And with that, Koch gets this favorable coverage and shoots up in the polls. For the Post, for Murdoch, it was picking among the four liberals, and Koch for all of whatever liberals' positions he may have. His bold stance calling for the police commissioner to be fired in the wake of the crime wave of the night of the blackout, and his stance on the death penalty helped. Cuomo was against the death penalty and brought it up all the time. It was seen to him as an anchor tenet of being liberal. Later he's going to reinforce Mike Dukakis. You jump ahead in time. Mike Dukakis has the same position about the death penalty, and that's going to help sink him in 1988. And Cuomo's kind of the force because Cuomo was such a popular guy by the time you get to 1988. Dukakis thought, well, if this guy's getting away with it, I suppose I can. It helped him to reinforce his position on it. Yeah, you can have a liberal position, still be tough in other areas. It didn't work so well in fact, Cuomo famously says to Dukakis, I think I gave you bad advice. In this case, he sticks to this position. For Koch's part, he says he has the brains, but he doesn't have the guts. And he called Cuomo's campaign Cuomotos. But despite not being a great candidate, Cuomo's able to, look, he's not tied to anything Beam has done. He has some good lines when he talks about liberal issues in the right way. When he talks about the death penalty, even, he can do it in a way that sounds right to the kind of 1970s culture clash you're already getting by the time of the mid-70s. This is where really conservative backlash in politics is starting from the 60s. And he says, look, the electric chair won't produce a single job. That was his way of taking on that issue. We are better than that. And then something really bad happens for Cuomo. It's Governor Kerry. Governor Kerry's asked, and he says, look, I know Mario can get the crime down. I endorse him. Give Mario a year. He'll get the crime down. If he doesn't, I'll reconsider my position on the death penalty. penalty. And it's like, for a lot of people, it's like, what? It's everything that's wrong in a statement. First of all, it's exerting that you control Mario in just another way. And then it's also like kind of goofy. Like, are you for it or against it? And so Cuomo has to double down now on the death penalty to also get separation from Kerry. And Kerry has to tell other reporters that he never made the statement to the one reporter and try to pretend what he said didn't happen. When the September primary comes, the surprise isn't Cuomo. It's Koch. Koch leads the vote slightly. Cuomo edges out Beam to get number 2. Neither of them, between Cuomo and Koch, the two leaders in the vote, they only get 39% of New Yorkers to vote for either one of them. And yet they are the two candidates that will then go into a runoff about 10 days later. And this runoff becomes just a kind of race for who they can get endorsements. Cuomo has this great speech. In fact, here's this great moment where you don't, especially in 1977, see the PBA, the police union, and the black churches as on the same side on a lot of things. But Cuomo speaks to both of these audiences, and Koch isn't invited to these events. In fact, he's quarreling with the police PBA union over the blackout thing and doesn't get their endorsement. And he has this great moment speaking to those two audiences. But something weird happens with Cuomo here. And maybe he thinks he's going to win. We're not sure what. Maybe it's just Cuomo being Cuomo. Like Bella Abzug, a candidate mayor, I mean, she gets a decent amount. She's the 4th place, but she gets a decent amount. Wants to endorse him and keeps coming to Cuomo's office to endorse him. And Cuomo never answers. And so Bella Abzug has no endorsement in the election. Beam, being the city's first Jewish mayor, and Koch would be a continuation of that. And he's not happy with Cuomo because Cuomo's tied to Kerry, who didn't like Abe Beam too much. Mayor Beam, for what it's worth, and you may not want Beam's endorsement at this point, Mayor Beam endorses Koch. And just in the endorsement battle, Koch ends up getting endorsements. Sutton, Herman Badillo, like important city leaders. And a lot of people say it's because of one way or the other, Cuomo kind of was asleep at the wheel. Or he was too high and mighty. Herman Badillo was a big city leader, and basically what he said is, and look, this isn't right, but he said, you want my endorsement, I want to control the public housing jobs. And it comes out later that he might have not met with Bella Abzug because he felt that the governor had promised her something. So if he accepts her endorsement, he'll look like he's closer to tied with Kerry. And these little steps. And then you come down to a Channel 13 television debate. Koch looks funny, well-rested, good, sharp, and Cuomo is kind of angry and tired during the whole thing. Here's from Mailer again. Cuomo refused to participate in the sort of deal-making that had long been part of New York's culture. It was true that New York's 5 county leaders, once the kingmakers of the process, weren't what they used to be, but they still mattered. Especially, he says, Meade Esposito. Having delivered his borough to Beam for September 9th's primary, he's up for grabs. Cuomo should have had no trouble. Italian, son of shopkeeper, outer borough Italian history, liked each other, but the zealously high-minded Cuomo, Mailer said, was just not in the business of wooing. He reluctantly met Esposito for a cup of coffee and promised him nothing. He wanted to know that I could put this guy in the transportation department. I said no. Koch, by contrast, gamely descended into the basement of Esposito's mother's house in Brooklyn for homemade meatballs, a culinary rite of passage for those seeking political favors from him. An informal deal was quickly struck. He would provide plum positions to certain of Esposito's cronies. Now, it's interesting because Esposito is going to get Koch into a little bit of trouble in the 89 primary that we talked about in a different episode, but here he makes the deal. I kind of agree with Mailer that some of these deals, we can all shake our finger at them, but they're sort of the thing that's done in these places. Cuomo's self-destructive tendency to harp on capital punishment also continued. He was defining himself on the death penalty, said Robert Sullivan, his own pollster. The argument that he was going to lose because of this only defined for him where he had to stand. It got to the point that even Koch, who picked up more votes every time he brought it up, was telling Cuomo to stop raising the issue. Cuomo almost seemed to be trying to martyr himself. But the campaign grew nastier as the runoff approaches. At one point, Cuomo is accused of anti-Semitism because what he says is if Koch were elected by what was perceived to be the Jewish vote, he would be known as the Jewish mayor. The Village Voice reported that Cuomo trucks in Jewish Brooklyn were being pelted with eggs. Koch workers campaigning in Italian Brooklyn, the same thing. In one case, a sausage pizza. Cuomo does a last-minute ad. They have Koch and his face morphing into John Lindsay, who had left the city kind of in, I don't want to say in shame. People liked Lindsay, a lot of people did, but he did leave the job. He didn't finish his term. So the accompanying voiceover elaborated on the similarities between these two men, suggesting that Koch's promises to take on the power brokers would prove just as empty, and that he would be equally tone-deaf to the problems of the middle class. Cuomo promptly pulled the spot, but Garth does his own, using Beth Meyerson, the former Miss America, saying, "Whatever happened to Carrot Cuomo? We thought your campaign was better than that." They're dinging Cuomo on going negative. "We decided to go negative," says Jerry Rafshoon, "and it didn't work." And for a lot of people, especially in the city of New York, which is so ethnic-based and has been, say, well, Cuomo has the Italians, he'll probably get the Irish. But what happens in the runoff is the various endorsements kick in. Koch just about splits the Irish vote with Cuomo, gets the Italian vote, the Jewish vote. Some other ethnic groups are kind of split between these two guys, Koch and Cuomo. And so the runoff between Koch and Cuomo, we talked a bit about it, and it's pretty exciting. It's a short period, but it really is a battle of the endorsements. And when you look at Koch, that's one of the things he wins. So he gets Abe Beam, he gets Herman Badillo. Koch getting Herman Badillo is a big thing. And there is one pretty sad incident that occurs during the election. And it's hard not to fault Cuomo in a way for it. Maybe not as much as Koch does, but let me tell the story. And that is that there were always rumors throughout his life, and various organizations have confirmed it. I like to, on personal matters like this, use what the man says. And the man, Ed Koch, always said he would never answer the question. It was nobody's business about his personal life. But I've heard both in press accounts, I've even heard in some personal accounts from people I know who know people and the like that, Ed Koch was really the New York City's first gay mayor, but he would not admit it. And in a time like 1977, it was a difficult thing to do politically. So what Koch did on this issue, just like Mario Cuomo did on the death penalty, he would say it's none of your business and make it more an issue about privacy instead of an issue about whether one should be gay or not, or should a politician be gay and the like. In the 70s, you had this kind of conservative backlash, but it came in a form. It was a kind of a funkiness to it. And you had folks like Governor Jerry Brown of California, who wasn't conservative per se, but had a little libertarian streak, especially as governor. He's been a little different in his second round as governor. And Koch kind of picked up on that. There's a whole William F. Buckley quote about Koch, and I'll butcher it, but it's like he's a liberal, but one that can look at government programs with a glass eye, and still be critical of them and the like. But during this campaign, Cuomo's campaign sought to use this, particularly in Queens and one of the big boulevards. There are posters up and down all at once that say vote for Cuomo and not an offensive line that rhymes with it, referring to homosexuality. So vote for Cuomo, not the blank, and it's not good. Ed Koch talked about it.
Well, I'll tell you how I dealt with it. It is shocking. I called Mario a weekend or two before the election. And I said, Mario, this is happening. Oh, really? I mean, he doesn't know about it. I said, Mario, you got to do something about that. It's not right. I'll try. I'll do. I don't believe he did anything. Now, that matter has affected our relationship from 77 through this year. We get along, and we got along as mayor and governor, but I always held it against him. I also held it against his son, Andy Cuomo. Even though social relationships when we meet in public are good, underneath, he knows, I know what I'm really thinking. You
And you dealt with this particular issue, the vote for Cuomo, not the homo thing, by saying, and I think this was, if not unique, unusual for a politician, saying, it's none of anybody's damn business.
Yeah, let me talk to you about this.
Yeah.
My reaction was to say, it's none of your business.
For the record, both Mario Cuomo and Andrew Cuomo denied that, this not that it happened, but that they knew about it. Mario Cuomo said there was nothing he could do. It was just enthusiastic supporters. And Andrew Cuomo felt like Koch's grudge against him as the son was just this way unfair family grudge type thing. It's a sad event. Cuomo continues to run, and this I find funny given the events in New York City today. Cuomo continues to run into the general election, but this time he loses an important supporter. Governor Hugh Carey says, well, I'm not going to endorse him this time. He's gone to, Koch has the nomination, and, Cuomo's trying to run in like the liberal third party, and essentially Koch says, I'm not going to endorse him this time around. And that's that. And you have Once Upon a Time in New York in 1977, a very rough, ravaged year for the city. They will end up with a leader in Koch, and I talked about it in that quick one about the 1989 primary. They will end up with a leader out of this crisis that will kind of shape the city for a decade in Koch. Actually, a politician that I respect quite a lot, and I think there's a lot to learn from him with people who are in politics today. But put that aside. And I hope you enjoyed this little look at the 1977 mayoral election in New York City and everything that went along with it. Okay, so in the episode, we talked about an incident where Mario Cuomo tackled a man who had thrown a pie at Mayor Abe Beame. We're going to geek out a bit on this whole event because it turns out there was a really big discussion about it 30 years later in 2007 in the pages of the New York Times and on its online site. And there are disputes as to whether it was actually a tackle, and even a little dispute as to whether it was a pie. So that's what's there. Let's first talk a bit about the whole pie man issue here. The pie thrower was Aaron Kay, and he dubbed himself, or people dubbed him, the Yippie Pie Man. And he was active in anti-Vietnam protests in the 1960s and 1970s. Son of Holocaust survivors. As he describes, he has a sharp sense of justice that came from who he was. He still posts on Instagram today, by the way, at least at the time that I'm recording this. He was part of civil rights protests. He was part of marijuana legalization campaigns. Pie throwing became Aaron's signature as a form of protest. a good way to embarrass public figures, especially when he sensed any hypocrisy or abuse of power. And it would draw media attention. Seeing a famous figure with pie or cream all over their face would draw attention to them. And it can make a powerful person look silly. And in a moment, it would reverse their advantage. Their advantage. All of these public figures, everyone from Abe Beame to Bella Abzug to Ed Koch to, some of the ones we're going to talk about, senators, governors, artists, is their notoriety. And for a moment, you can take that notoriety away and turn it into a bad thing almost, because they're going to have this moment of public exposure that's not looking good for them. He had a variety of victims, too. Some made very much sense given his politics. Like, for instance, he goes after Phyllis Schlafly. Now, you remember her. She's a conservative activist who was very much against the Equal Rights Amendment. He throws an apple pie at her and shouting, "This is for the ERA." Now, this is a specific symbolic gesture attacking like kind of motherhood and apple pie. He also goes after California Governor Jerry Brown. Now, most people today would say, why? Phyllis Schlafly has nothing to do with Jerry Brown. He's a liberal. But in the 70s, Jerry Brown was sort of blurring the line between being left and right. And it was the kind of thing that Kay didn't like at all. He even goes after Andy Warhol. Why? Well, it shows how nuanced at times Kay was. To him, Warhol wasn't some great artist. He was the Kardashian of his time, you might say, in Kay's opinion. He represented for Kay the commercialization of art and a cult of personality. He liked to say it nothing against Warhol. He goes after the hypocrisy of the system, he says, not the individual. But with Phyllis Schlafly, I get the sense he went after the individual a bit. The Associated Press has a picture noting that Phyllis Schlafly wipes apple pie from her face at the Waldorf Astoria Hotel in New York, Saturday, April 16th, 1977. Some of the press would highlight her reaction. She described it as an assault. She said it caused eye irritation. And it was not good to do. It wasn't decorum, the type of decorum we need. But when asked to press charges, she said no. That was not the case for another individual, William F. Buckley. Aaron Kay saw Buckley, who was the founder of National Review, high priest of the conservative intellectual movement, as the perfect symbol. And in the same year he does the debate, he lobs a pie at Buckley during a debate at the University of Illinois. Buckley's livid. He brushes it off his face. And he declares, this is not protest. This is assault. And Buckley presses charges. He strongly considered about, issues of free speech. But in Buckley's opinion, this act wasn't part of discourse. It demeaned civil discourse. He does press charges. He was taken into custody by campus police immediately. Buckley files that complaint. He receives a fine. Kay jokes, I spent more on pies than I did on legal fees. Daniel Patrick Moynihan, another person, a Democrat, became a Democratic senator from New York, had a fairly liberal voting record. But in 1976, before he ran for office in New York, he had actually worked for the Nixon administration, wrote a memo that seemed to be blaming African Americans for their own situation, for their own inequality. And that was done in 1965. So here, 11 years later, Kay throws a pie in his face, and he throws a chocolate cream pie to make a symbol. Moynihan also doesn't press charges, tries to laugh it off. He was running for Senate, after all. There were copycats. In 2004, two men, William Zachary Wolfe and Philip Edgar Smith, ran up on stage at the University of Arizona, where author Ann Coulter was speaking. They threw custard pies at her. One of the pies hits her in the shoulder. They're arrested. They're charged with misdemeanor counts of disorderly conduct, plus a felony charge for criminal damage due to damage to the backdrop of the stage. Officials estimated at roughly $3,000. Eventually, all charges are dropped. One of the reasons is that Coulter and the arresting officer do not appear in court. Coulter later publicly accused the Pima County attorney of dropping the case because of her bias against her. But local media reported that the reason for dismissal was procedural. No one appeared. The two called themselves Al-Qaeda, and they said the arrest was worth the stunt. We could talk a bit about Kay and his pie actions. I mean, obviously they're getting a lot of attention. You could laugh it off. You could also say that some of the Buckley criticism's right. I mean, it's not a normal part of discourse to be doing anything to people like that. You know, discourse should occur in some type of respect for the person speaking, right? It's kind of a non-discourse action. But a lot of this stuff happens, especially the 70s seems to be when it happens. I'm going to talk about incidents in the 60s. So we're going to talk about a little bit of, since we talked about this leftward side of dirty tricks, say, let's talk about the right side, and we'll talk about more with Nixon's dirty tricks. Not the Watergate necessarily, but some of the things running up to that, especially around Donald Segretti, we should say, who was behind a lot of this. The biggest one is the Canuck letter of 1972. Edward Muskie is riding high in the polls. He had been Hubert Humphrey's vice presidential pick in 68. That ticket didn't win, but it came close. In 1970, Muskie personally led the effort for Democrats in the midterms. And a lot of people feel that a last-minute commercial that Muskie did really helped them to take 15 seats away from Nixon in the House. When he runs in 1972, fake letter. It's planted in the Manchester Union Leader under fake name, and it basically says that he had made disgusting slurs about French Canadians. And it doesn't even have any proof. It's just a hearsay letter from a guy who said that he heard him saying it. Muskie has to deny it. But once you're denying it, you're talking about it. And it just looked bad in a state, New Hampshire has a large French Canadian population. Segretti and colleagues printed up counterfeit flyers advertising free beer or rock concerts at Democratic rallies. And they'd lure in people who had no interest in politics. They also distributed fake tickets, so halls filled with the wrong crowded supporters were left outside. Before primary days, phone banks working for Democrats would suddenly get jammed by anonymous prank callers. And operatives would phone volunteers late at night, pretending to be from the campaign, and then asking them to show up at 4 a.m. in the morning. This would demoralize the troops, especially those who may have done it. So, this wasn't visible protest theater in the way Kay's was. These were little tricks that didn't want traced back to them. Eventually some of them would be. But both of them are mischievous. Now, I think it's important to talk about another figure, if we're going to talk about Nixon, that Nixon also got dirty tricked in a sense. And there's a fellow whose name or pen name, no joke, Dick Tuck, Richard Tuck, and he became a legend because his target was always Nixon, Richard Nixon, and no one else. And he was active from the 1940s when Nixon was running for Senate, and he kept on going into the 60s. In 1950, during Nixon's Senate run against Helen Gagan Douglas, Tuck is a UCLA student, and he somehow manages to get himself assigned to introduce Nixon at a campus event. Now, instead of flattering Nixon, Tuck keeps on giving this long, boring introduction, and he keeps telling the crowd, the candidate only has a short time to speak. And he goes on and on and on. And indeed, Nixon did have a short time to speak, and he was furious. And when he runs for president in 1960, Tuck hires a pregnant woman to wander around Nixon's motorcade, carrying a sign reading, Nixon's the one. And when Nixon gives a speech in Chinatown, Tuck figures out how to write in Chinese letters about a loan from Howard Hughes and writes, what about the Hughes loan? And puts it right over Nixon's rally. Tuck felt he was a little guy sticking it to the big guy, So back to the incident in 1977 that we talked about. It got a little discussion in 2007 because even I had to look it up. And I'll do things like this when there's an extraordinary story like Mario Cuomo tackling someone. I read it in Maher's book, but you never know. And now that I looked at it a little more, there are some differing accounts. But here's what I think we know. Mario Cuomo did react. Just to lay the scene, all the candidates, Abe Beame, Mario Cuomo, Ed Koch, Bella Abzug, 2 other candidates are all on the stage. And Aaron Kay comes up and throws what I believe is a cream pie at Mayor Abe Beame. Bella Abzug doesn't have any love for Abe Beame, goes to eat some of the pie, cream, or what have you. Mario Cuomo's reaction is he definitely leaps from the stage. And then accounts differ as to whether he merely restrained the person a bit or just got near him because security was already there, or whether he tackled him indeed. Here's how the New York Times handles it 30 years later in its editorial pages. An anecdote yesterday about a younger Mario Cuomo tackling someone who threw a cream pie. Mr. Holzer, a vice president at the Metropolitan Museum, told the story at Cooper Union. He elaborates, he's there. I was actually mightily impressed. Poor Mayor Beame was wiping pie from his eyes. My then boss Bella Abzug was placing her finger in the icing. Ed Koch, Herman Badillo, and Roy Goodman seemed hurt the pie wasn't thrown at them, so they could have gotten some attention. Cuomo's the only candidate to attack the attacker. I thought he was pretty darn impressive. One of the commenters on the New York Times site is skeptical of the account. The Times clipping, and the written by Maurice Carroll, does not mention any tackling by Mr. Cuomo. And the pie was actually apple, setting up Mayor Beame to say, I like the big apple, not apple pie, yuck, yuck. Mr. Holzer sends in an email, I would grant the possibility that the pie could have been a mix of fruit and cream. Had the writer been able to recall Mr. Cuomo's athletic counterattack more accurately, I absolutely recall both gobs of cream and the flying candidate, as if it was yesterday. I was close enough to see both clearly. Bella later said the cream ruined her hat. No, this story is not embellished in fact or flavor. In a follow-up, he added, I just read the piece. I revere Mickey Carroll, the writer of the 1977 contemporary article on this pie-throwing incident. But I'm aghast he didn't report Cuomo's acrobatic counterattack. I still remember plenty of cream with the apple, and I remember Bella's outfit. I could have described it to you before I saw the photo. Sewell reached out to Maurice Carroll, who wrote this article, and now is the director, this is in 2007, 30 years from when he wrote the article, at Quinnipiac University's Polling Institute, who responded, I remember the story well. Abe Rosenthal got sore because I gave publicity to the pie thrower. If my memory was correct, it was Aaron Kay who threw several pies that year. He threw the pie in Beame's direction, and Cuomo, with an athlete's quick reaction, jumped forward on the stage to get the guy, but the cops got him first. Kay, a bearded, unkempt, and pudgy guy, was called a yippie, part of a semi-organized crowd. So this debate in 2007 that takes place 30 years after the event is there's a commenter named Jeff who says, enough of Mr. Holzer's embellishments. First he claimed it was a cream pie. Now he adds that Bella Abzug placed her finger in the icing and Beame wiped the pie from his eyes. It was apple pie, not cream pie. Plainclothes policeman tackled the pie thrower, not Mario Cuomo. The pie did not hit Mayor Beame in the face. Beame said, I didn't get hit. The Times noted that only a small chunk or two of soggy pie reached its target, creating a smudge on the right shoulder. Abzug could not have placed her finger in the icing, since apple pie has no icing. Just 3 years ago, in 2004, Holzer wrote an article in American Heritage magazine where he gave a slightly different version. He wrote, the debate was in full swing when a young man suddenly came racing down the aisle, carrying an object in his right hand. In a flash, he reared back and hurled it towards the debaters. It turned out to be a harmless apple pie. Miraculously, almost simultaneously, Cuomo leaped off the stage and flew at the prankster, whom he knocked to the ground before startled police officers joined the tangle. Cuomo later modestly explained, I thought he might have been throwing something more dangerous. And another hero was born at Cooper Union. Holzer is a writer of a book about Lincoln and his great speech at Cooper Union. So this debate was at Cooper Union. Now you get into internet geekdom where Jeff is saying, commenter, the platform in Cooper Union's Great Hall is still too high to make viewing from the front rows comfortable. If the platform's so high and Cuomo leaped off the stage, how was it that the then 45-year-old politician hurt or even bruised enough as to require the slightest medical attention that would have caught the eyes of reporters all over town? Why wasn't Cuomo hurt if he did this? There's also a debate of, in one account, Holzer says that the man ran down the aisle and threw the pie. In the other account, it says that the man had press credentials. He was a reporter for the Yipster Times, so he was crouched in front of the stage, and he reached into a canvas bag and pulled the pie out and threw it. Holzer now claims there were gobs of cream in that pie. How didn't those gobs get all messy in the soft back Kansas bag? An apple crumb pie seems easier to pull from the soft bag, making the apple pie claim by the Times more likely. Bet writes, there is precedent for a cream pie from Time magazine. The oh-so-clever pie chucker apparently liked variety. So the one that hit Beam was an apple crumb. What of it? Sometimes stories become slightly embellished over time. Then a Stephen Goldenberg, and we can't verify this, but this is what's written in 2007. The Times is very kind of generous about commenting. He says, I was advancing Mayor Beam at the event. I was in the green room when we saw the pie being thrown on TV. As I rushed out, I saw Mario jumping off the stage to try and grab the guy. I am not sure, but he may have re-injured his back. He might not have caught the guy, but he was jumping off the stage to try, and that's good enough. Remember, Holzer said Cuomo leaped off the stage and flew at the prankster, whom he knocked to the ground, before startled police officers joined in the tangle. Holzer called it an act of aerobatic counterattack. That really creates the image of a middle-aged politician as a brave action figure. Pretty impressive. Yet both those key features, the leaping and the tackling, are absent from Maurice Carroll's version, either from yesterday or from his 1977 article. Stephen Goldberg's memory is more helpful to Mr. Holzer. He saw a jump off the stage. Not exactly a tackle, but the jump is there. Whose memory is right? So Jeff looks at some of the other major daily newspapers. The Daily News and Post are tabloids. I figured a picture of the pie throwing or Cuomo's heroism would have been in the front pages. No dice. In fact, no pictures at all. The Daily News placed it on page 15. Candidate forum is a debate session, and remarkably, it doesn't mention the pie throwing at all. Not a word. The Post has a headline, Yippee has fling and mayoral debate. It wasn't seen as the most exciting story of the day. The Post said, it's an apple crumb pie, just like the Times version. And the one from Time magazine, there was no cream or icing. That does not support Mr. Holzer's second and third versions, which emphasize the cream on the pie. The Post adds there was no direct hit. The gooey apple filling merely struck the right shoulder of Beam's suit. But here's the good news. There's a description of Mr. Cuomo's actions, and it's more consistent with Mr. Holzer's recollection. Here's what the New York Post reports. Mario Cuomo, looking angrier than he does on his TV commercials, shot off the platform and grabbed Aaron Kay. I saw the guy running up, and I didn't know what the hell he was doing, said the Secretary of State. I am trying to figure out why I went running off the stage like Batman. He wrenched his back in the bargain, he said. It's not clear whether Cuomo leaped off the stage in any kind of aerobatic counterattack or whether he just ran down the stairs. But the Post says he left the stage and grabbed the pie thrower. And Cuomo's contemporary statement supports that. So whose version is right? Readers can decide for themselves. This leads to Helen writing in 2007, it's so refreshing that in an era where if you switch your TV remote to CNN at any hour, you'll find a broadcast that will probably scare you silly. And all the other news shows are right behind them. In the competition for Boogeyman of the Year, a forum does exist where the topic would seem to be which flavor of pie was thrown at whom 30 years ago. Well, Helen, you have no idea what's coming. If any of these thrown pies were still around, they'd certainly be way too stale to eat, so who cares? Helen writes, I am in contact with the pie man himself, Aaron K., and I have known him for 40 years. That's a whole heavier of an issue in a country that's supposed to be a guarantee of freedom of expression, where they found bombs in airplane passengers' shoes a whole lot more recently than 30 years ago, is that Aaron K. is under heavy surveillance by the police now, 2007, after having thrown a few pies in protest of some of the politics going on. So, Helen's not very happy about that situation. I just thought this is all fascinating, a little bit of an incident that even I had to struggle with some of the accounts on, and it turned out that just one book wasn't enough for even this little kind of silly incident. Thanks for listening. If you're like me, you're looking for ways to live better, live cheaper, spend smarter, travel more, make the most of your time. That's exactly what Chris Hutchins does every week on his podcast, All the Hacks. Chris covers everything from hacking credit card points and planning unforgettable trips to smarter investing, even better ways to cook dinner at home. 2 recent episodes that I liked of All the Hacks are a deep dive on Bank of America credit cards, up to 5.25% cash back. Sounds good, right? Or contrarian takes on money, risk, and retirement. Very important for those of us who are getting up there. So search for All the Hacks. That's All the Hacks in your podcast app. Hit follow and start upgrading your life today. Again, that's allthehacks.com/podcast. You'll be glad that you did.